The Neanderthal Parallax trilogy by Robert J. Sawyer. So this video is going to be a little bit different for a couple reasons. First off, I did a separate video review of the first book in this trilogy called Hominids, and you can go back and watch that. You can read this as a standalone, but when it comes to this video that I'm doing, I'm going to kind of break it up into three parts. First, I'm just going to talk about why I don't recommend this trilogy to anybody, and I'll give the reasons why. And then there are some redeeming qualities in this trilogy, so I want to talk about that too. So in the middle section, I'm going to talk about kind of some of the world building and some of the ideas Robert J. Sawyer had for this that I think was a good idea. And then in the very end of the video, I'm going to talk about some spoilers because there's some really interesting things that happen in this trilogy. It's very mature subject matter, so I think if you can get past the beginning of why I don't recommend this, and you're curious about some of the weird plot things going on in this trilogy, then you might stick around and watch that at the end. So first off, I probably would have DNF'd this trilogy. I was kind of lukewarm on the first book, and I kind of state that in my first video. And when I started the second book, it kind of hooked me, but I was also on vacation. And so I was reading both of these books, Humans and Hybrids, which are the book 2 and book 3 of this trilogy. I was at the airport, I was on a plane, I was at the hotel, I was on the beach, I was reading it all over the place. And this is a good book, in my opinion, for something like that, where I'm not putting a ton of attention into it. This trilogy was very descriptive. There wasn't anything that was too hard to kind of keep track of. So it was a perfect kind of vacation book with very little interest in it, because I was very lowly interested. I would have picked something else up, but I was on vacation. So the main reason I wouldn't recommend this is in the very beginning of the first book, there's a rape scene that's described. And then throughout the whole trilogy, this rape kind of is a driving force of the plot. So even though it's only described once, you're constantly reminded of this event. You're almost always in this one character's head, the one who got raped. And she's always kind of just remembering about it, or it's, changed the way she looks at things. So you're constantly reminded of that. And while that's not a horrible thing, most science fiction readers aren't really looking for that as the main driving force of the plot. But what makes it a little bit worse is that it was written by a guy, and he's talking about this woman and her period and the rape and her body and if she's overweight and her nipples. And I mean, he goes on, and it was a little weird. I'll put it that way. And at times I felt a little icky reading some of it. I don't think Robert J. Sawyer had bad intentions at all. It just came off a little weird and creepy reading about that. Now, the other kind of reason I wouldn't recommend this, in book 1, there's a pretty gruesome, it's a rape scene. It's short. It happens quickly. It's kind of a bump in the street almost, not to downplay what happened, but she's not getting tortured. It's not this long drawn out scene. It's a pretty quick scene, but it's very descriptive. Robert J. Sawyer describes things to where you could probably recite them to a court reporter. So there's that. And in the second book, there's another weird sex scene that just gets a little strange. So those are the main reasons why I wouldn't recommend this. There are some other reasons. It felt a little lazy. The plot felt like there was just ideas and characters thrown in whenever it was kind of convenient. And so I feel like I kind of took one for the team here. But there are some redeeming qualities. So if you want to stick around, first I'm going to talk about just like the world building Robert J. Sawyer did in this trilogy. So the main idea and premise of this book, and even this is going to get into a little spoiler territory, so if you plan on reading this, probably don't watch this and just go read it. But in this book, like 40,000 years ago, during a planet polar shift, the world kind of split into two universes, basically. The one we know, and this was written in 2002 and 2003, so it's very early 2000s, and it was written just like it was kind of taking place in that time frame. So all of the technology, everything's kind of like we knew it back then, about 20 years ago. And then on the other parallel universe, you have a alternate history where Neanderthals became the dominant species and Homo sapiens sapiens died out. So the way these Neanderthals evolved, they're at the same point in the timeline that we are in the year 2003 or 2002. But they evolved very differently. They kind of stayed hunter-gatherers. They never farmed, and so that was one reason they could keep their population low. So the global population is only in the millions instead of 6 billion. And they also have a different family structure. The male and females only come together during the full moon to kind of procreate. But all the females are on birth control, and every 10 years, the government or the people controlling them release the birth control so they can have a batch of kids. And all the generations are named after every 10-year generation of children. So in the book, they're at like 150 some since they started doing this. So when the male and female Neanderthals aren't together, they're kind of in a homosexual relationship. The females have a female mate and the males have a male mate, and they spend most of the month with them. And then they do this thing where they come together during the full moon and do their thing there. So the other thing, they have this technology that they wear on their wrist called a companion. Now this is pretty cool. It was pretty forward thinking of Robert J. Sawyer. It's very close to what our cell phones can do these days with a bit of AI. Now, the important Neanderthals have a very high-end version of these companions that have AI built into them. And the lowlier Neanderthals kind of get a scaled-down version that can just do some basic stuff. So that was pretty cool. And some other interesting things, they never came up with religion. They never had this idea that there has to be a meaning to life. And they can just go around being a member of society and never have this like anxiety or this whole thing about what's going on there. So Robert J. Sawyer did a really good job, I think, kind of making this world, and there are some eugenics. So if someone commits a crime, they sterilize them, but they also sterilize anybody that shares like half of their genes. So they take it to an extreme to make sure that all of these bad traits never make it into their gene pool. So that's another interesting thing with them. So this story, it's really about these two societies coming together, and the Neanderthals really point out a lot of issues with our society. The humans, or the Homo sapiens, point out issues with the Neanderthals societies. You know, neither one of them are perfect, but the Neanderthals are definitely like more peaceful, and they have a lot of things going for them. So the driving force of the narrative through this trilogy basically revolves around this rape, but in the first book, it's not really apparent why the rape happens, and I mentioned that in my video. So one of our characters, who's a scientist, she gets raped early on, and then our Neanderthals create this kind of quantum wormhole into our world, which bridges the two parallel universes together. Once they come together, that's where the plot kind of takes over. The first book just goes over our main character, Ponter, who is a Neanderthal, who was the only one that made it to our world. he's trying to get back. The porthole closed. And then on the other side, in the Neanderthal world, you have his man mate, his homosexual partner, who's kind of been accused of killing Ponter. So there's like this court battle with him trying to prove his innocence and Ponter trying to get back. And in the first book, that's kind of most of what happens, and the plot gets resolved. They make it back. Everything's great. But there's this thing going on, this rape. Like, what did that have to do with the story? Well, once you get into book 2, this book mostly goes over the main plot resolution with our female character, Mary, and this rapist. And so he finally makes an appearance in the second book, and it turns out he was a co-worker with Mary, and he raped her because he felt like being a white male was not letting him advance in his career, and they were sliding all of these minorities and females in front of him. So to retaliate, he raped her, and then a little while later he raped another person in the department, which is actually their boss. So very weird, to drive the plot with this was just weird and creepy. It did not seem believable. This guy was he wasn't even in the first book, but it had so much to do with the first book. In the second book, he shows up, and he's just some guy who was mad because he couldn't get a promotion or whatever. So, in the beginning of the book, Ponter is kind of on his home world talking to a psychologist, and he gives away that he did something horrible in this other universe. So I instantly thought Ponter figures it out and he kills the guy. And so most of the book that's kind of the driving plot force. There is a lot of back and forth with some delegates from the Neanderthal world. This porthole's reestablished between universes, and they come over to our world and they're asking all kinds of questions like, why do you have memorials for wars? There's a scene at the Vietnam War, pretty thought-provoking scene. In the end, Ponter's like, well, if you have this to remember not to do this again, if you're voting on a new war, does everyone come down and stand in front of this to vote? And everyone's like, no, of course they don't. So there's just some ideas that were brought up. I'm trying to find anything that was like good or redeeming in this trilogy, and that was some of it. There was some thought-provoking ideas and some things that make you think, because these Neanderthals are just seeing our society from a completely different place. So probably the highlight of the whole trilogy, though, is the end of this book, because this whole time it's building up. Ponter, the Neanderthal, is going to try to kind of get revenge on this rapist who raped this girl he became involved with, Mary. And so he finally tracks him down. It's this big thing, and he makes it to his apartment, and I'm just thinking he's going to go in there and figure out a way to kill him. He goes in there and threatens him and gets him to confess first, and the guy confesses everything. And then he kind of takes him and makes him pull down his pants, and he bends him over, and you're thinking, wait a minute, this is going in a completely different way. And the chapter is written from the point of view of the rapist, and he's thinking, he's going to rape me now. He's going to get back at me. And, oh yeah, these Neanderthals are homosexual for most of the month anyways. This is like nothing to him. That's what's going through this rapist's mind. And right before the chapter ends, there's kind of like this scene break. And then kind of the very end of the second book, you got the rapist, and he's in his apartment, and he kind of wakes up and comes to and realizes where he was at and what was going on, and freaks out, and he runs into the bathroom, and he wants to check out what kind of damage was done. And he's checking himself out in the mirror, and everything looks good, but then he glances down and he notices his nuts are gone. and there's just this incision that was seared up on his scrotum. So Ponter didn't kill him, he didn't sodomize him, he ended up just castrating him. So it makes a lot of sense. In Ponter's world, they castrate criminals all the time. And so that was a pretty good double plot twist that Robert J. Sawyer threw at me. Maybe it was because I didn't really care so much. I wasn't looking for foreshadowing or anything like that. But both of those surprises did kind of make me chuckle, and I really didn't see it coming. So then we get to the last book. And this book, you know, our rapist is still alive. You're wondering what's going to happen there. They're going back and forth between the world. They're still bringing up differences between the societies and stuff like that. But there's also another character that's brought in, and this is where the plot just gets kind of crazy. This guy, he's like works for a company in the US, and he goes over to the Neanderthal world, and he's like, wow, they've done such a good job. It's like perfect. There's no pollution. And come to find out, he wants to create a virus, release it over on that side of the world, wipe out the Neanderthals so that humans can go over there and have a fresh start on a fresh, clean world. So that's the main plot driving force behind the last novel. It was pretty bad. There was some really bad scenes. It turned out our rapist, he was kind of bad at first. There was a scene where he's confronted by Mary and Ponter, and he's like, well, you guys didn't think of this. You know, Canadians don't have guns, but I do. And he like breaks out a gun, and then he tells Mary to say your prayers. I mean, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. That's exactly what he says. It's pretty cheesy. But it turns out, after they get away from him and everything, he somehow feels bad. I think all the testosterone leaves his system or something. But he feels bad, and he ends up figuring out, he's working at this place where this guy's making this virus to wipe out the Neanderthals. He goes in there and figures it out and tries to sabotage it. And there's this weird plot thing at the end that I kind of understood what was going on. I kind of didn't even care at that point. But there was another little twist thrown at the end, and you know, they ended up saving the world over there. So anyways, that's really all I got to say about that one. If I could turn back the clocks, I probably wouldn't read any of these, and I would probably could have found something way better to spend my time on. But you know, I'm all for putting up with some misery. I run marathons and stuff. This wasn't that bad. It was kind of funny. There was a couple redeeming qualities. I'm giving them 3 stars, each one of them. I think the second book, Humans, was probably my favorite just because of the weird plot twist, and it was the shortest. But these books, they read pretty quick. They have short chapters, kind of like thriller style, very descriptive books. So, like I said, I don't really recommend it, but if you want to, you know, by all means, read it. And I don't really know what I'm reading next. Kind of back from vacation, taking a little break. Like I said, got the holidays coming up. I did read Circus World. I completely loved it. I almost want to read part of it again because it's a lot deeper than I thought, and I think I might have missed something. And I want to read the other 2 books in that one too. So I don't know. I might have another video by the end of the month. If not, everyone have a good rest of the year, and we'll see you next year.